We're starting about what you
news.
see as a shift in policy and tone as it comes to America's...
Hold on. It's not what I see as a shift in policy and tone. It's what David Ignatius and a lot of other people are noting over the past week. Thomas Friedman, others have noted there has been a shift and change in tone, at least in foreign policy.
Okay. So there are many that see a shift in policy and tone toward our position toward Syria. The White House is accusing Russia of trying to cover up the Syrian government's role in last week's deadly chemical weapons attack. The Trump administration says declassified intelligence shows the chemical agent sarin was delivered by a Syrian regime aircraft. Meanwhile, President Trump is bolstering the U.S. role in one of Putin's most hated alliances. Today, the president is scheduled to meet with the Secretary General of NATO at the White House. They're set to talk about strengthening ties and plan to hold a joint news conference. Yesterday, President Trump signed a treaty allowing the entry of Montenegro into the Mutual Defense Pact, which would expand its reach in Eastern Europe. President Trump will also travel to Brussels for a gathering of NATO leaders in late May.
All right, so this is obviously, Nick, a big change in what's been said about NATO. We were wondering, would Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric win the day, or would you have people like General Mattis saying, if NATO didn't exist, it's so important we'd have to create it? Who would win there? It looks like, once again, as he did last Thursday night, he's listening to his foreign policy advice.
Well, it seems like the kind of masters on policy here are coming into their own. They've had a couple of months to get up to speed, to find their way around the White House. This is Tillerson and Mathis. I do think, though, that Tillerson also said that Ukraine shouldn't be a concern.
We're going to get to that.
Taxpayers.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of bumpiness and inconsistency here.
That's all I was saying.
If you listen to Nikki Haley and Mash, hear one thing, but any given day it can be confusing and a bit all over the place.
Yeah.
And it's not just rhetorical. I mean, Donald Trump last week attacked Russia's client state in Syria. I mean, that was a loud statement to Russia that it wasn't going to stand by and let it control Syria and let Russia control the narrative about Syria and say that maybe these chemical attacks were a setup, or maybe the U.S. was behind them, which is Vladimir Putin alluded to that this morning in an interview. It's not just rhetoric. It has been rhetoric. You've had Rex Tillerson say that Russia is either incompetent or complicit in these attacks. That's a lot different than what we heard on the campaign trail, but it's backed up, at least last week, by action.
And we're going to talk about it in a second, John, where Tillerson also said yesterday we had the gaffe, no doubt about it, behind closed doors, but when he's in front of the camera, he says Assad's going to go. It's only a matter of time, and Russia might as well get used to it. And just explain, because we've talked about this before, how Russia's foreign policy since 1991 has been built upon resentment. And all these people saying that this attack was an inside game, that the Russians said, yes, come, please attack us, while we're here protecting our client, are fools. They know nothing about the way Russia thinks. To be there and be seen basically as completely impotent to the United States, saying, yeah, we know you're in Syria, we don't like what just happened, we're going to blow some stuff up, actually sends a horrific message to Russia and Putin.
Right. I mean, Christmas Day 1991, one of the great days of the 20th century, the end of the Bolshevik Revolution. Gorbachev dissolves the Soviet Union, but they had an incredibly ferocious right flank that included a young Vladimir Putin that didn't want to see Soviet and Russian greatness go away. And so they've returned in the ensuing decades to a kind of, it's an interesting combination of a kind of pre-World War I great game. They want spheres of influence, right? They want the Ukraine, they want the Baltics, they want Iran, they want Syria. With this nuclear overlay of Cold War expansionism as well. So it's an interesting combination of the two. And my own view of all this right now is that I suspect that President Trump is basically the political equivalent of climate change. It's not always going to be hot, and it's not always going to be cold. It's going to be extreme swings at all points. And you saw it in the special election in Kansas. You see it in the Russia policy and the Syria policy. He thrives on chaos, and he's going to govern in the way he campaigned, which was chaotically.
Again, for a country, Mika, that is steeped and has built their foreign policy based on resentment, it's not beyond. I mean, they certainly understand. There's a reason why the United States didn't go into Czechoslovakia when they were in Czechoslovakia, and we didn't go into Hungary and 68. Wait, was Hungary 68?
Yeah.
68. Hungary in 68. But we fire 50 or so missiles into Syria in 2017. My only point is that this is deeply embarrassing for Vladimir Putin. And you can play all the, hey, is somebody helping somebody? No, Vladimir Putin would never want to be sitting in a country where the United States just ran over him. And so it's interesting. But anyway, you go with Tillerson.
Let's break this down. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is warning in no uncertain terms about its ties to Syria, saying the Assad regime was, quote, coming to an end. He said Russia is at risk of losing its relevance in the Middle East by continuing to support the dictatorship. Still, the new secretary's inexperience is showing a bit. He reportedly said to a group of top diplomats at Tuesday's G7 meeting in Italy, quote, why should U.S. taxpayers be interested in Ukraine, question mark. That's according to France's foreign minister.
Willie.
Well, the State Department said it was a rhetorical question.
What's that mean?
He wasn't actually asking, why the heck should we be spending our money? Oh. It was meant to open a discussion, is what the State Department said anyhow.
Like, why did the birds go on singing? That sort of
Exactly.
All right, well,
Put it
here's
in
David
words.
Ignatius's piece that you
Rhetorical.
thought kind of put things in perspective here. You say, David says Trump's week of...
No, I didn't write this. I wish I could claim David Ignatius's columns. I didn't. This is David Ignatius
You just
for the
inspired
Washington Post.
Trump's week of good decisions could rebalance the world and the White House. The Trump administration's foreign policy has been a dizzying spectacle of mixed messages and policy reversals during its first 3 months. But in last week's crucial tests, President Trump made good decisions about Syria, Russia, and China, moving his erratic administration a bit closer toward the pillars of traditional U.S. policy. The Syria operation, generally praised at home and abroad, has consolidated the power of Trump's core foreign policy team in ways that may alter the political balance in this White House. Trump has also tilted toward China and away from Russia. That rebalancing is the opposite of what Trump seemed to favor during the campaign, when he blasted China and wooed Russian President Vladimir Putin at every opportunity. But it's a more sensible and sustainable course.
Nick, I think that's... Of all the things that we've talked about, all the bright, shiny objects in front of us, I think the biggest takeaway from the past week, and I would say for most of the foreign policy establishment, it has been exactly what David Ignatius said at the end, which was, it's not about Syria, it's not about this, it's about the fact that he now is actually focused on China in a constructive way. They had a very good meeting. And he seems to be tilting a bit more towards China and a bit more against Russia.
Well, look, the important thing is the pillars of foreign policy that David mentions in that column. Engagement with China, care with Russia, and to follow that path and get more on base with what have been the alliances that have propelled our strength and our projection of power around the world is actually it's extremely important if you can keep it up. Our allies were worried up until now. They were constantly, sending up flares about alliances and NATO and U.S. military force. And so I think that this is all reassuring. And it's also fascinating to me that you saw some Obama alumni praising those strikes in Syria, which really suggests how much there was a desire for some kind of action there, and President Obama was the lid on it for a long time.
I was surprised.
For better or for worse.
I was surprised by just how ready they all were to jump in, the Obama administration, which suggests that I'm sure people like Samantha Power, who I don't think she spoke out on this, but obviously she was deeply concerned about his Syria policy. But John Kerry, I didn't hear too much from Joe Biden, but all of his top players have been told him for a long time, you can't let this go on in Syria.
Well, John Kerry had a plan in 2013 to do exactly what Donald Trump did last week, which is to attack the Air Force and the ground and ground the planes so they couldn't carry out those chemical attacks. That was out in the open. That was public. He said it. So we know how he feels. And you have to believe there are a lot of people in the Obama State Department and perhaps around the White House that wish Obama had done what Trump did last week.
The two open accounts on Obama's foreign policy legacy are Syria and the Iran nuclear deal. I think.
Right.
I mean, we just don't know how those are going to turn out. And that's what, even in 25 years, we'll be talking about what Obama did and did not do on those two issues.
Let's go to Moscow live right now. NBC News Chief Global Correspondent Bill Neely. Bill, good morning. Given all this tension we're talking about right now, the escalating rhetoric following last week's airstrike, and the idea that Rex Tillerson will confront Sergei Lavrov about Russia interfering in the United States presidential election, how did all this meeting get going?
Well, it got going late, about 30 minutes late, and it began with a couple of lengthy opening statements, certainly from Sergei Lavrov. It almost sounded like a dressing down at one point as Rex Tillerson listened. Lavrov said, "We've heard a lot of ambiguous and contrary ideas from Washington. We've seen a lot of troubling actions in Syria, and it's fundamentally important that these actions don't happen again in the future." And he also said it's important for us to understand the real interests of the United States. I think Lavrov's signaling there that they want clarity from America. Is it Assad must go or not? Rex Tillerson replied to that saying he wanted to identify areas of sharp difference and common interest, even when our tactical approaches might be different. And I think that word tactics is significant because Tillerson isn't going in there with an ultimatum or a demand. I think he's going to focus on the tactics. You, Russia, may think it's tactically wise in Syria to ally yourselves with Assad, with Iran, with Hezbollah, but strategically, globally, does that make sense? Is it in your global interest to be allied to these people? How is that going down in the Sunni Arab world, for example? Is that good for you? And I think he'll also try to drive a wedge in the Russian position. Russia has said we are not, wedded to Assad. Our support for him is not unconditional. So Rex Tillerson will want to know, well, under which conditions would you be prepared to get rid of Assad, and how long might that take? One amazing statement, I think, that's worth mulling over that came out just as they were meeting from Vladimir Putin on a Russian television interview that will broadcast tonight. Putin has said the level of trust between the US and Russia has deteriorated under Donald Trump. Now, that's pretty astonishing when you think of the level of trust that he had with Barack Obama, which was 0, nil. And he's now saying it has deteriorated under Donald Trump. So that message from Putin. He also said, where's the evidence that Syrian forces used chemical weapons? There is none. So on the chemical weapons issue, it could be that Tillerson and Lavrov are actually talking at cross purposes because they still basically fundamentally don't agree that the Syrian forces used chemical weapons. Guys?
All right, NBC's Bill Neely on the ground in Moscow for us this morning. Bill, thanks so much. And Putin actually said in that same interview, he kind of let this hang out there, that the chemical attacks in Syria came from somewhere else, not from the Assad regime. He didn't say exactly what he meant by that, but suggesting perhaps we knew something about it.
And he obviously reads alt-right news sites, too.
Oh, my gosh.
Right. Oh, wait, no, he funds them. That's right, I'm sorry.
So
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories, and you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.